Hey, it's Keith from groups.com, and I just wanted to show you some stuff with my recently updated plugin List Shifter, which is now at version 1.6. And in addition to the Iterate features that you may know about and some of the cool list manipulation features that it's had forever, I've added a new iteration technique called process list that I'll get into. And I wanted to talk a little bit about iteration in Bubble in general. So let's get started. Now, in general, right, Bubble pretty much prohibits, except with a few paid features, iterating or looping over things. And while there may be some good reasons for that with respect to processes like create a new thing, make changes to a thing, the various list-related equivalents of those, copy a list of things, make changes to a list of things. There's really no good reason that Bubble doesn't allow us to iterate inside of the page, right? Like on the client side of an application. And I ran into that pretty early in my experience with Bubble and did all sorts of workarounds for that, including using run JavaScript and things. But ultimately, I developed a technique inside of my Calendar Grid Pro plugin to allow iteration over a list of dates, and then kind of generalize that capability in List Shifter, which is actually a open sourced plugin, and it's quote unquote free to get started with, but I do like a donation if you find value in it, because it opens up an extreme amount of value in Bubble. Now, let's review some of the ways that we can use List Shifter to iterate over things in Bubble. Kind of the most useful thing that you can do with List Shifter is you can use the feature called create a numeric list, okay? Generate a numeric list. And when we do that, what we do is instead of supplying List Shifter with some sort of list, right, like the result of a search or the contents of a custom state, or some list that we've constructed in some other way, what we do is we leave the list to shift field empty, and then we go down here and we say make a numeric list. Yes, we tell List Shifter the number of items that we want to create, and these are going to be numbers, by the way. They have to be numbers, right? So data type of list is number. I say make a numeric list. Yes, set the number of items. Let's start with 10, okay? And then the numeric list is just generated by a simple algorithm. We start at a certain number and we increment that number by some other factor, right? So if we say 10, 1, and 1, we're going to wind up with a list of numbers that go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now, of course, we can visualize a list. So we can actually see the list that's held inside of List Shifter using a repeating group, right? Repeating groups are simply a visual element that help us to see the contents of a list. Now, you can, of course, build interface elements with them, and they're much fancier. But at the end of the day, a repeating group is just a way to visualize a list. So I've got List Shifter A over here. List Shifter A is going to make this list of 10 numbers for me. And then I have a repeating group over here. And let's just take that repeating group, and I'm going to set it to look at List Shifter A's. We can do original list or shifted list. In this case, I'm not shifting the list. I'm not reversing it. I'm not rotating it. So let's just view the contents of the original list. Okay. Now, those values are of type number, right? The list has number type. So our type of content over here needs to be set to number. And then inside the cells of my repeating group, we'll just make sure that we're showing current cell's number. All right. Now, in preview mode, let's go and load our page. And what we will see is that this repeating group now contains 1 through 10. This is also a static repeating group. It's only showing 10 values. So if this list were larger, I would have to rotate through it to see the rest of them. Let's just start with a list of 10 numbers, okay? Now, a list of 10 numbers, or a list of any number of things, actually, is actually a for loop. It is, we can iterate over it, right? If we've got the numbers 1 through 10, that's kind of the same thing as having a for loop, like in JavaScript or in some other programming language, where we could iterate over that list and say, give me this value, let me do something based on that value, give me the next value, let me do something based on that value, right? That's the general concept of looping and iteration. So let's assume now that we want to do some sort of mathematical computation, and this is one of the core applications of list shifter. Let's say that these numbers represent the radii of circles, right? And we want to compute the area of a circle with this radius, right? So let's assume this means like 1 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet, and I want to know the area of these 10 circles, right? So you might remember from math class, right, that the area of a circle is the value pi times the radius squared. So let's use list shifter's iteration capability to compute that for these 10 values. To kick off the iteration process with list shifter, I have to execute a function called iterate a list shifter. And I've already got it set up here, and you'll see that over in my console, a bunch of stuff appeared. Now, but we don't see any of the results of it because we're not visualizing that anywhere yet. But you can see that we can iterate over 10 values pretty fast. And I'm actually using an accessory plugin that comes with list shifter. It's called Debug Buddy. And Debug Buddy can log things to the console or to the Bubble debugger, and it also has a benchmarking tool built in, so you can time how long different things take. And so this is useful when you're optimizing iterative computations. And so you'll see that what we found here is that we could compute 10 items in about 247 milliseconds, which is fast enough. You'll see that that feels pretty much real time. That was a little aside. Now, let's go back to what happens on the begin iterate button click, okay? So back over in my edit mode, I'm going to click on the begin iteration button so that we can show you what the workflow is like. So we'll do start edit workflow, right? We could also have just gone over to the workflow tab. And so we see that when button begin iteration is clicked, what do we do? So first, I'm setting a custom state. We'll talk about setting up states for this kind of thing in just a minute. We're going to clear out a custom state. Let's see. We are clearing out another custom state, and we are going to hide this repeating group values. Okay. And then we're going to start Debug Buddy benchmark. And here's the actual thing that we need to do to kick off iteration. We do this thing called begin iterate list shifter A. All right, so let's remove this and just show you how this is set up from scratch. So I go to element actions and I go to list shifter. I go begin iterate for a list shifter. I select the list shifter I want to iterate on, and this is list shifter A. And then I can select the list that's held in list shifter that I want to iterate over. There are 3 lists that can be held in list shifter. There is always, well, if you supply a list or if you generate a numeric list, you've always got original list. And then as long as there's an original list, there's also a shifted list. Shifted list can be rotated, it can be reversed, etc. And then there's a third, this is a new list called processed list, and it's special, and you can only create a processed list using the process list action, which we'll get to in a bit. But for the purposes of just showing this basic kind of workflow iteration, let's go and select the original list. Okay. Once begin iterate a list shifter kicks off, what happens is list shifter is going to fire an event for every single item in the list. And it does this sequentially, in this case, 1 through 10. So it's gonna fire off an event, it waits for a workflow to finish, and then it fires off the next one, okay? And it'll do this 10 times. To successfully iterate over a list with list shifter, you have to define a workflow. And if the workflow doesn't exist, it's not going to work. So let's go and look at that workflow. Down here, I have a workflow that triggers when list shifter A iterate from list shifter. That is the event, iterate from list shifter, that the list shifter fires. So let's just look at setting one of these up from scratch. I've already got one defined here, but it's probably easiest if we make a new one. So what I'll do is I'm just going to go here. I'm going to disable this workflow. Okay. And let's just make a new one. So we will do this. Let's go here and we will do let's do elements, a list shifter, iterate from a list shifter. I really do hate the syntax that Bubble uses in these menu items because none of them make sense. But basically, events that are triggered by a plugin, they have this format. You'll find them under element for element type plugins like list shifter. And so you see that we have a variety of events that we can trigger off of. So iterate is one of them. Iteration complete is thrown when we're done with an iterate action. We also have some other things that are in here too, like an initialized state, when the thing's done rotating the list, when the thing's done reversing the list, etc., so that you can detect all of the actions that it's done. But in this case, we're interested in the iterate action. So when iterate is going to be executed every time list shifter sends an iterate event. Okay. And so I can now just do whatever I want to in this workflow. So in this case, let's compute this value. Okay. So there's a couple of special outputs that list shifter has that you can now get. So for example, I can do, let's do element action set state because I've got this state set up. I think I've got it set up on group A. Let's see, is it group A? Group A's iteration result, list shifter contents copy. I think we could just use it anyway. And since apparently Loom just decided to crap out on me, let's just go and make a new state from scratch. Okay, let's go back into our design mode and let's see. I had previously used this text element as a holder. See, I said the answer. We'll just make a new one. Let's see. We can do anything, and we can select any item actually in the page and put a custom state on it, including the page itself. Let's just see. Do I have any custom? Now it'll be confusing if I put a custom state there. Let's just here. How about there's this weird repeating group right here. Okay. Let's see. We'll just call this RG placeholder because I'm not really doing anything with it. And then let's create a custom state on it. So the easiest way to create custom states in Bubble is just to hit the little eye icon here to get the element inspector, and we can add a new custom state. And so let's create a custom state called current circles area. Okay, so this is going to be a number, and this is where we're going to hold the computation of each circle's area. Okay, and then let's add a list of numbers. This will be list of circle areas, let's call it. All right, and it will be state type number, and it will be a list, right? So now we've got a custom state that can hold a single number, and we've got a custom state that can hold a list of numbers, and we're going to use these to hold the results of our computation, okay? And again, they're attached to RG placeholder. All right, so let's go back over to our workflow, and let's see. So when list shifter iterate from list shifter, we will do element actions set state, right? We will select element RG placeholder, and we'll select its custom state current circles area. Now, the value that we want to compute is pi times r squared. So first, let me show you where r would be, right? So we've got that list of 10 numbers, and where we will find the current number is in list shifter A's. Let's see here. Whoops, where are you? List shifter A's current iteration item, right? So list shifter A's current iteration item always has the value of the current item in the list, all right? So if we do this, right, we're just going to be, shoving the value from the list itself into this state. Now, we don't want to do pi r squared, so the easiest way to do that is to do list shifter A's current iteration item times list shifter A's current iteration item, right? That would be list iteration item squared, and then we can multiply it by pi. So let's do times, right? List shifter A's current iteration item. Okay, so now I've got the radius squared, and we can go times. Now, kind of have this problem, right? I don't have pi anywhere. There's no, I don't think anywhere in Bubble we can just grab the value of pi. So what I could do is I could do, 3.14, what is it, 19? Oh man, now I got to check, right? What's the value of pi? Hold on, let's get it the way that JavaScript has it. So let's go back to my design mode. I'm going to open my console, and you ever seen the console before? You hit F12 on most browsers to get the console. Now, the console is where you can see logs of what's going on, whether logs that you're shoving into the console or error messages and stuff. And you see all sorts of interesting things when you open the console pane in your web browser. But another thing that consoles can do is they can just run JavaScript. And JavaScript math.pi is actually the value of pi to a certain precision. And so we see it's 3.141592, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to go back into my workflow, and I'm going to use that number because that was a lot easier than like Googling, right? Okay, so there we go. So now I've got r times pi, which is pi r squared. Okay, so now I'm computing the area of that circle, shoving it into current circle's area. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push that value onto the list of numeric values, right? So let's do element actions, set state. We will grab this RG placeholder. This state is list of circle areas, all right? And the value I want to put into this is the current circle's area, but I want to push it onto the list. And the way you do that in Bubble is you say that the value equals RG placeholders list of circular areas. Let's see. Item plus item. Okay, whoops. Man. Fat fingers. There we go. Iterate. Let's see. So RG placeholders list of circle areas plus item. RG placeholders. Current circles area. There we go. So what this is doing, right, is this is saying take the current list, take list of circular areas and add a new item to it. And that item will be this item that's stored over here. Okay, so we're just going to push that onto the list. All right. So now what's going to happen is iteratively, list shifter is going to cause this workflow to execute, and we're going to build up a list of 10 answers, right? So let's make it so that we can actually see our answers. And I guess I'll just use this repeating group over here. So instead of showing the numbers that are in list shifter A's original list, I'm going to show RG placeholders list of circular areas. And yeah, I typed circle areas, and then I just said circular areas. Sue me. All right. In preview mode, maybe this will work. Oh, wait, there's one thing we need to do. I forgot to change this current cell's number. No, that's fine. Okay. Now, let's just go and let's just refresh our preview mode. All right. And let's do begin iteration, see what happens. And nothing happened. Why is that? Well, the reason that happened, and I wasn't really paying attention to the issue checker, because we're playing with data types and stuff here, and this is a demo project, so I've got about 10 issues, and I didn't even notice that a new one appeared here. But what I forgot to do is I forgot to pick the list shifter we were going to take iteration events from, so it's got to be list shifter A. All right, so now it'll actually do something. Let's go back over into our preview mode. Again, the issue checker is super helpful sometimes, right? Actually, it's helpful all the time. All right, so we'll do begin iteration. Hey, look at that. There you go. So what happened is we iteratively computed the values of the area of these 10 circles. And so you'll note that we can tell this is correct because the first value is 1, and so 1 times 1 is 1, and then times pi is pi. So that's pi r squared for the value 1 is 3.14159 blah, 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 which is pi. So there you go. That happened pretty quick. Maybe we should see like how long that took. You might have noticed that over here in my console, Debug Buddy is reporting some things, and that's because I have some Debug Buddies set up in my project. But let's make a new one and let's use it to benchmark how long this is happening. Let's go back over into our workflow, all right? And so here is our when list shifter A iterate workflow happens. And what I'm going to do is let's just insert an action and move my fat head. Let's insert an action. All right, we will select plugins, Debug Buddy. All right, and then what you do with Debug Buddy is you can log a message to the console, you can report something to the debugger, or you can do a benchmark. And you might have noticed that one of the messages that was thrown there was reset benchmark. I've already reset the benchmark state, and so now I'm ready to benchmark. And so I'll say benchmark yes. Okay, and now what happens is every time that this action gets executed, Debug Buddy is actually going to take the current time and it logs it and it stores it actually up in the window of the page. And then when we're done, we can get a summary and some statistics about the time between each of those samples, okay? So all we're going to do is say benchmark yes here, okay? And that should be good. The only thing we need to check now is, let's see, when list shifter A iteration complete, then I have I already have it set up. So I put another Debug Buddy, I put a little message here, iteration complete, and then I select yes for benchmark summary. And that will summarize the results of my benchmarking. Just watch what happens. All right, back over here in our preview. All right, back over here in our preview, let's click Begin Iteration. Boop. All right, so there we got our answers. And now we see at the end of this, we got a summary and we got all these little numbers here. So you see that what happens is Debug Buddy, this is actually the current Unix time, okay? And it logs that. And then the next time it logs that time, it compares these two values. And so we know that like each of these iterations was taking somewhere around 40 milliseconds. And then when the summary prints out, we can see that the total time was 363 milliseconds. There's a total of 9 samples, right? The starting plus the 9 following. I just report that as 9 rather than 10 because the samples are actually it's the distance between these two numbers. And anyway, we see that the average time was 40 milliseconds per workflow. The minimum one, the fastest one, was 38 milliseconds, and the maximum one was 47 milliseconds. We can just do this over and over again, and we can kind of compare. Like this one completed faster, right? It was only 249 milliseconds, 202 milliseconds. So we're somewhere on the order of like a fifth to a quarter of a second. And that's pretty good, right? It's like when we start with a blank page and we don't have any values in here yet, we see that they appear pretty quickly, and they'll appear even more quickly if I close my console. It does slow down things a little bit when you're actually viewing console log messages. And so you'll see that, we get the progress bar for a second, but it's, real time-ish, and you'll see that this last one completed in 187 milliseconds. So, we're below a fifth of a second to compute 10 numbers. How much longer does it take to do longer lists? Like if I double the size of the list, and what I've done here is a list shifter is just looking at the value of this input to generate its numeric list. And so now it's generating a list of 20 numbers. And if I do the iteration again, you'll see that it did that 20 times, and it took about a half second. Let's just close the debugger, and let's just run a couple more of those. Okay. So it's taking roughly double, right? We were around 200 milliseconds, and now for 20, we're around 400 milliseconds. So you can see that as the number of iterations increases, there's basically a linear escalation of the amount of time it takes, right? So now this is cool for, maybe dozens of iterations. Like, let's just try it. Like, what if we go up to, and Loom just crapped out on me again. It's not my day. What if we go up to like 100 iterations, right? Like, how long does that take? Let's just kind of see. So we've reloaded our page. Let's give us 100 numbers. You'll see that List Shifter generates the numbers really fast, and they find their way back up into Bubble very quickly. So let's click on iteration. And so this is going to give us like 100 circles of areas of 100 circles. Okay, so let's see. How long did that take? That took about, that says 2,900 milliseconds. So that's 2.9 seconds, just under 3 seconds to do 100. That's kind of okay. Now, since it scales linearly, like if we go to 1,000, right, that's going to take about 30 seconds. Let's do something more moderate, like we go to 300 and kind of feel how long that is. And you'll see Debug Buddy is logging each of these iterations for me. It's awesome that we can iterate. I mean, there's before features like this, there was no way to iterate in Bubble at all and stay in the no code environment of Bubble, without a lot of chicanery, right? So this is really cool, but we're already starting to hit the limits of like what might be reasonable and real time. And for a mathematical computation, there's really no reason that we need to utilize a Bubble workflow. If we were building a standard web app and we were just, building it with JavaScript and HTML and CSS, we would just do this computation in the page. We wouldn't have, any overhead with respect to passing this list object back and forth. It would be really fast. And that's where process list comes in. So process list is a new action that can iterate over Bubble lists, but it doesn't require you to set up a workflow. And so what I did is I built essentially another no-code environment inside of Bubble, inside of the interface to this action, where you can do iterative computations like this. And let's just show that. So let's look at how we set up List Shifter for the process action. Okay, I'm going to go back into my design mode. And over here, I've got my little buddy List Shifter. And if we look at his interface, we will see that there is a process action option down here. By default, this field will be empty. And to use a process action, you have to select the process output type. So there are two things that the process action can generate. It can, one, generate a list, and two, it can generate just a scalar value, like a single value, like if you wanted to do some sort of complex summing operation over a list, okay? But we have to tell Bubble what type those things should be, right? And so in this case, I'm going to be generating a list of numbers, right? Just like we did with the iterate action. So I have to select my process output type as number. All right. So now that we have that, we can successfully execute the process action. And so let's set that up. I already have a button on my project here that says process, right? There it is. And process already has a workflow attached to it. I'm going to get rid of the console over here. I don't need that anymore. Oh, stop it. There we go. Let's do start edit workflow and look at what happens when process is clicked. So when process is clicked, I have, let's see, I'm doing a benchmark operation. Let's see, what am I doing? Debug Buddy, benchmark, yes. Reset benchmark, yes. Okay, so this is going to reset our benchmarking so that we can kind of time how long process list takes. And then there's an action here called process list from List Shifter A, all right? And you'll see that it's a really big dialog. This is, in fact, a rather simplified no-code environment. Now, all these fields and stuff, it looks really scary, but it's conceptually really simple. What we're doing is we select a list that we're going to process, just like we did with iterate, right? And so just like I did with the iterate action, I'm going to select list shifter's original list. And then I've got a series of steps here. If you look closely at this, you'll see I've got step 1, it creates result step 1. Okay, and then I've got step 2, it creates result step 2. And then I've got actually 4 more steps. So I've got 6 steps, kind of like a little step sequencer, if you will, if you're familiar with music. And for each of these 6 steps, I can do different things. So what I can do inside of a step is I can take 2 things and operate on them, or I can take 1 thing and operate on it, right? So we'll build this from scratch, but let's just look at what I've already got set up. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm trying to compute the area of a circle, right? So again, that area is going to be pi times the radius squared, all right? And our radii, of course, are held in original list. So in step 1, what I'm doing is I'm taking the current list item, all right, which is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all right? And I'm raising it to the second power. So I'm doing r squared, right? So I select for operand x. We have operand x and operand y, and those are the 2 sides of the equation, right? Some of the operators that we have take 2 arguments, some just take 1. We might get to that, but this is like the basics of how you'd use this. So we take the list item, right? And then for operator 1, we do exponent, right? And I've also made it so that you can kind of help teach yourself JavaScript, because for each of these things, like, see, this is plus, minus, multiply, divide, raised to a power, right? Modulus, increment, decrement, blah, 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 blah. For all of these things, I've actually put the syntax for JavaScript right there. So like, as you get used to this, you might start to learn some JavaScript. But again, that's just like a little side effect. And also it kind of helps me with debugging as I was building this. It's like, okay, what am I actually doing when I'm doing these different steps? So I just list them out exactly what's happening. So anyway, so we're going to take the list item, we're going to raise it to the y power. And so for y, I just type the number 2. These step operand y fields, these are always of the processed list type, okay? So we have a list of numbers, so this field is numeric, and so I can put 2 here, all right? So now that we've got r squared, how do I multiply it times pi? Well, the output of this step creates a thing called result of step 1, which probably won't surprise you. This is a lot like Bubble, right? Where inside of a workflow, a step will often have a result, right? And then in a future workflow step, you can grab that result and do something with it. Process list works the same way. So what we do in step 1 is we get an output called result of step 1. And now I can go to step 2. Step 2 starts here. Step 2 creates result of step 2, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the result of step 1 times pi. And in process list, we actually have access to math.pi. You see how I went over to the console and I executed this thing called math.pi and it gave me the number for pi? Well, I've built that in to process list. So we can select math.pi and then we can multiply it, right? That's the times operator. Multiply it by result of step 1. So you'll note that for operand y here, instead of using an expression field, I also have this pull down, which gives me access to a whole bunch of constants. It's actually the same stuff that's up here. So I can have an expression, right, of number type, or I can take some value that internally list shifter knows about. And we find those internal values here in the pull down, right? So for step 2, you'll see that I have access to the result of step 1. So I can multiply pi times the result of step 1. And that's going to give me pi times r squared here in the result of step 2. Now that I have that value, I have to do something with it. And so down here we have these 2 fields. We have push result of step 2 to the process list. That is, take this item we computed and put it into the list that we're eventually going to output, right? I can also do things like I could sum this value to the processed result, right? Or I can set the processed result to this value. So the processed result, again, is like a scalar value. It's just a single value. And then the processed list is a list value. And they're of the same type in this case. So we're computing a list of numbers. I could also do things like take the sum of those numbers. So maybe we'll do that, right? Maybe I should rebuild this from scratch. Let's do that. All right. So I'm going to turn off this workflow that's pre-built, and let's just rebuild it so we really see how this works, okay? Let's go, and now what we do is we'll make a new when. So we'll do elements, and element is clicked. We will say when the button, which button is it? Button, process. When, oh, wait. Yeah, when button process is clicked. Where'd you go? Oh, you went right underneath my fat head. All right, when button process is clicked, let's give this a special color. Let's make it purple. When button process is clicked. Let's do this. Well, let's go get an element. You don't have to do this. I'm going to benchmark this though. But let's go grab Debug Buddy, right? So let's get our, plugins. Let's get Debug Buddy. And we will have Debug Buddy throw a benchmark. And we'll also reset the benchmark. So what happens when you do that is we clear all the values that are stored in Debug Buddy, and we're ready to start benchmarking again. And you can do these in the same step. So we're going to reset the benchmark, and we'll throw down a benchmark. And let's see, now we will do the process step. And so we'll go to plugins, element actions, because list shifter is an element. All right, and we will go to process list, a list shifter. Now, unlike the iterate action, we don't have like a begin process action. Process actually happens in a single workflow step, which is really pretty cool. And so we just put process list, the list shifter. We select the list shifter we want to use. That's list shifter A. That's again where these values like 1 to 10, or you saw how we could change them to bigger numbers. Those values, which represent my radii of my circles, are stored, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate over the original list, all right? And then I'm going to build my steps that happen. So we can do this in a different order. Let's do this. Let's take, well, actually, there's not a better way to do this. I was going to say we could grab pi, and then we could do the step, and then we could do a third step. But like, why, when we can do it in 2 steps, right? So for step operand X in step 1, we're just going to go grab, let's see, list item, right? So list item 1 through 10, all right? We're going to grab list item, and we are going to raise the list item to the second power. So we will get r squared, and that creates the result of step 1. We'll go down to step 2 now, and we will do, let's see, pi, math.pi, where are you? Math.pi times the result of step 1. Okay, cool. Now, we've got to remember to do something with that value. If you don't do anything with the values, actually this computation will happen, but nothing will appear at list shifter's outputs. There's actually a good reason I've set it up this way. You might be like, why isn't it just the default? Like, why wouldn't it just push something to the list? Well, it's because there's a lot more flexibility built into here. So you have to remember to take whatever value you want and do something with it. So we will push the results of step 2 to the process list. And we do that by just saying yes right here. Now you can see that as I do with my plugins, I'm not using a checkbox here. This is a dynamic value in a way. And that just is gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of what you can do. Maybe we'll get into some advanced stuff in this. But okay, we're just going to take that, shove it onto result of the process list. Now, we don't have anything in our page that's going to show us the process list, do we? So we could just go and let's just take our friend over here, this repeating group, okay? And instead of looking at the placeholders list of circles, which is where we shoved our previous computation, let's go get list shifter A's, process list. There it is, process list. And then you'll see processed result. That's the single numerical value, but the list that we can generate from the process action is in process list. So grab process list. And let's see if this works. As often happens in these videos, I might have made an error here. If it works, I'll be surprised, right? Let's go up here. And of course, Loom decided to crash on me again, but let's go over here and click our process button and see what happens. Oh, and wow, it actually, we made it work. So you'll see that that happened very quickly. I happen to have a button that we can clear the process list with. Look at what happens when we click process. And let's close our console. Wow, it's like super real time, right? Now, you know, maybe it's not that much faster than iteration. We kind of wonder, right? Let's do this. Let's go. And you remember we went to like 100 items and it took us like, what was it? I don't know, like a few seconds, right? To do 100 list items. Let's look at how fast process is on 100 items. Wow, that was almost the same speed as just 10 items, right? Let's go look at our console and you'll see that down here, you'll see that, yeah, that completed in 36 milliseconds. We computed the area of 100 circles. And you can see I can scroll through the list here and I can see them all. And you can see that there's 100, right? Because there we go. There's the 100th value. That's the 100th area of a circle. All right. Could we go even bigger? What about 1,000? You see that list shifter is very fast to get the list back up into bubble. And let's clear our list and let's do process again. Boom. That only took 51 milliseconds. So you see that actually the process action doesn't exactly scale linearly. There's actually, when you have small values, you know, there's a little bit of overhead for process and you actually have a lot of headroom. 1,000 items completed really just about as fast as 100 items did. Let's just keep doing this again. Let's see, where's my clear? Clear, process, process. See, we got 40 milliseconds that time. There it happened in 33. And I've got a big honking computer, but you're going to get similar performance on a lot of things. You can see we can do 1,000 computations in just 26 milliseconds. Totally awesome, right? Let's go up to 10,000 items. Now we're really talking, right? Like that's, you know, that's a lot of values. Let's see, clear the list and let's process again. Well, that only took 161 milliseconds. We'll do it again, 165, 113. So, oh wow, there we averaged about 100 milliseconds over those. That's pretty cool. 132, 131. That's, you know, that's really fast. Shoot, how long does it take to do 100,000 items, right? Now, if you if you watch this value down here, you'll see that we're going to start to see that there's a little bit of delay in terms of how long it takes. I'm going back to 5, and I'm going to go to 100,000. There's a little bit of delay in list shifter getting that value up back into bubble, right? So what's actually happening here is inside of list shifter, those values, you know, 1 through 10, now 1 through 100,000, those values are an array. Now, a list in bubble is array-like, but it's not the same thing as an array. It's an array type object with a bunch of other functions on it. And so what you start to see is there's a little bit of delay in terms of generating the list and getting it back into bubble. But the point of this was to see how fast we could process 100,000 items. And you'll see that that just took us 1.7 seconds. 1,700 milliseconds is 1.7 seconds. And I can show this. You can see that we have a huge number of values in here. We just generated a list of 100,000 numbers. And it took us about a second. And we did it again. And it took us about a second and a half. There's just over a second. This one, 1.1 seconds. So like that's super awesome, right? This is the power of list shifter for this kind of thing. And I'm going to get my video back and maybe we will talk about some other use cases. But these are the basics of how you can use list shifter to do mathematical operations or other types of operations very, very quickly.